Hello, 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 and welcome back. We are in lesson 4 of our Revelation Revealed, and today we're going to be talking about the Church of Smyrna. So let me go ahead and hurry up and dive in. This should be a short lesson because it's really only like 4 verses of Revelation. But the letter to the Church of Smyrna is 2 verses 8 through 11, and I'm reading from the Christian Standard Bible. And it reads, "Write to the angel of the church in Smyrna, thus says the first and the last, the one who was dead and came to life. I know your affliction and poverty, but you are rich. I know the slander of those who say they are Jews and are not, but are a synagogue of Satan. Don't be afraid of what you are about to suffer. Look, the devil is about to throw some of you into prison to test you, and you will experience affliction for 10 days. Be faithful to the point of death, and I will give you the crown of life. Let anyone who has ears to hear listen to what the Spirit says to the churches. The one who conquers will never be harmed by the second death." So that's their basic letter from Christ. And so the Church of Smyrna represents the persecuted church, um, or like the persecuted Christian. So the persecuted church age lasted from AD 100 to 312 approximately. Smyrna itself was a very wealthy city that was founded probably about 300 years before Christ. It was a very commercial center. It was on a direct trade route between like India, Persia, and Rome. And during the time of the Church of Smyrna, it was the greatest period of persecution the church has ever known. So there were like violent attacks against it in an effort to obliterate it due to the results of the apostolic church age prior. So remember, the apostolic church age prior, the apostles were alive, and they were spreading the message of the church. And so the church grew and spread. And so as a result of that, then the persecution began. However, the more the church was persecuted, the more it grew. So it taught Satan, and I always lowercase his name. It's not a typo. I'm not giving him a capital letter. But anyway, the more it grew, so it taught him an important lesson that persecution isn't really the best tool to get Christianity not to move forward, but actually compromise is, right? He does so much more damage by getting us in a position of compromise than persecution. And so when you think about it, like you think about your teenagers, right? When you went through your teenage years, everyone says the teenagers are so rebellious. And so the more you try to restrict something, the greater chance people are going to do it or want to do it. And that's exactly how persecution works. Whereas if you try to compromise, you may get the behaviors that you want. So he already knows, based on our testimony, he may not get us to lose our salvation, but living a compromised life will definitely shorten a lot of the blessings that we're to experience here, on earth, right? So he learned that persecution isn't really the best tool. Okay. So as we talked about before, for each church, Christ gives a commendation, a condemnation, a counsel, and a challenge. So Christ's commendation to the Church of Smyrna was, was when he said, "Write to the angel of the church in Smyrna, thus says the first and the last, the one who was dead and came to life. I know your affliction and poverty, but you are rich. I know the slander of those who say they are Jews and are not, but are a synagogue of Satan." So basically, Christ introduced himself every time he has a church message. He introduces himself with a characteristic of himself. So when he talked about Ephesus, he talked about being the one who holds the 7 stars in his right hand and who walks among the 7 lampstands. So that was pointing to the fact that he is a faithful protector and provider for his churches. To Smyrna, he's emphasizing his eternal nature, the first and the last, one who was dead and came to life. Now, the real commendation of this church is that there's no condemnation for them at all. Like he didn't find anything to condemn them for at all in terms of the way the church was led. And so that's the real commendation. However, when he talks about, I know your affliction, that lets us know he's aware of their persecution, um, and your poverty, but you are rich. So at the time when this happened, because this was an age of persecution, there was an intense hatred for Christians at the time. And so if you took a stand because of Jesus Christ, like a lot of them back then, their shops were boycotted, their employment was severely impacted. And newsflash, if you are an entrepreneur, or I mean, even if you're not one, this still happens in other ways today. So not every attack against your business, not every attack against your finances is because you don't know how to sell or market. A lot of times is, because of you're taking a stand in some way regarding your faith. Sometimes on the opposite end of it, you start to, experience attacks. And so when the thing about entrepreneurship is, especially as a Christian, like there's a spiritual component and there's a physical component. So there's two types of work that you have to do to build your business and to build your business strong. You're going to need to be good at spiritual work, and you need to be good at the actual work, like your physical work, your expertise, what your trade is. If you are not, then you will find an imbalance. It's either if you too much in the spiritual and you're not actually going out selling and marketing your business, well, then you're not going to make the funds that you need to make. There will be the opportunities that will be open for you. There's no like avenue for them to come through. If you are doing too much of the physical work and not doing anything spiritual, any spiritual work towards your business, or getting to the point where you're deepening your spiritual work in your business, then you will find your business is constantly in a feast or famine. There's a lot of you hit certain things, you can't move forward, because it's both that needs to happen. So this is not just something exclusive to Smyrna. Like it may happen in a different manner, but it still happens to this day. So the other thing to note is that churches back then experienced material poverty, but they had very great spiritual power. Whereas today it's the opposite. Many churches are materially wealthy, but they're pretty spiritually weak, right? They have very little spiritual power. So that's just something to note. It is no shade being thrown. It's just an observation. And then the other thing that you have to remember, no matter what, like whether you're an entrepreneur or not, riches are a resource, right? But God is your source. So however he chooses, to bless you, that's fine. But ultimately, he is the source of it. So when Christ talks about them being poor but being rich, yes, you can take in the fact that your wealth is dependent on what you focus on here, because never forget, I know a lot of times they say, oh, when you die, you can't take things with you, but yet you can actually store treasures for yourself in heaven, depending on what your focus on is here, right? So there's that. Okay. So continuing on with the commendation, he talked about, I know the slander of those who say they are Jews and are not, but are a synagogue of Satan. So in Romans 2, verses 28 through 29, it gives us exactly the New Testament definition of what a Jew is. And it reads, for a person is not a Jew who is one outwardly, and true circumcision is not something visible in the flesh. On the contrary, a person is a Jew who is one inwardly, and circumcision is of the heart, by the Spirit, not the letter. That person's praise is not from people, but from God. So that's basically the New Testament definition of what a Jew is. And in terms of synagogues of Satan, basically there are two basic heresies, and I believe we talked about this in the lesson previous, but any church that's leading people into one of the two basic heresies. So heresy one is that Christ is not really God. It just depends on what it is. They'll either tell you he wasn't born of a virgin, he didn't rise from the dead, he was a great prophet, but he wasn't God. Like that's somehow, some way, when you filter through it's going to end up being that. Or the other basic heresy that a lot of people don't notice is that there's a trying to make you believe that Christ's sacrifice isn't enough. And that's even within some denominations of Christianity, right? So you have to be careful. So it's like they're trying to like add to salvation, but you have to remember that we are saved by grace through faith, right? So it's not, oh, some faiths will have you feeling like you have to observe a bunch of rituals and sermons, you eat or not eat certain kind of foods, worship on certain kind of days. Like all of that is a basic heresy in terms of if you feel that your salvation is dependent on that, or adding to that work, then you know what I mean. It kind of falls into one of those two categories. When you cut at the root, you will see it's one of those two things is where you're being drawn to. Okay, so that's basically what is considered a synagogue of Satan. It's not actual like devil worship. I mean, I'm sure that's probably it too, but a lot of times it's a lot more insidious than that. So, okay. Now moving on to his counsel for that church, he told them, don't be afraid of what you are about to suffer. Look, the devil is about to throw some of you into prison to test you, and you will experience affliction for 10 days. So the Lord tells them and us not to be afraid. That is the most repeated command in the Bible. And the devil throws a lot of us in prison still to this day because many of us are operating with poverty and fear mindsets that are no different than being in jail, because all of these limiting beliefs, these poverty, negative mindsets that we carry limit our freedom in doing certain things now, right? So prison doesn't always have to actually be like incarceration in an actual prison, nor does being afflicted, right? So yes, he's specifically talking to them about literal, prison and affliction. But for those of us who are reading this in present day, we're persecuted a lot of times because of the mindsets that we choose to hold on to, right? That are keeping us bound, that are keeping us imprisoned. All right, so however, in this particular verse, the 10 days that Christ is talking about is 10 periods that under 10 Roman emperors. So the first one was Nero. He is the one who had Paul beheaded and Peter crucified. Domitian is the second one. He's the one who had John exiled to Patmos. Trajan, he had, I forgot an E at the end, had Ignatius of Antioch burned at the stake. Marcus Aurelius had Justin Martyr, who the term martyr comes from, had Justin Martyr killed. And then you have Severus, Maximinius, Decius, Valerian, and Aurelian. Diocletian, however, he was like the worst out of them all. He was the greatest antagonist to the faith. He fed Christians to lions. He tarred and feathered them. He had them tortured by dogs while people watched like and cheered. I mean, he was like, woo. So, but those are the 10 days that he's referring to are the 10 periods under those 10 Roman emperors. Now, in terms of Christ's counsel, it is estimated that during the time of the persecuted church age, that approximately 5 million Christians were martyred for the testimony of Christ during this time. However, in spite of that, the church reached its greatest numbers in proportion to the population at that time. We still have not reached it. So in terms of it being in proportion to the population. Okay. And then let's wrap up and talk about his challenge. So he challenges them. He says, let anyone who has ears to hear listen to what the Spirit says to the churches. The one who conquers will never be harmed by the second death. We will discuss the second death in greater detail later on in the book. There's like a whole, I think when we get to like Revelation 20, we will get into it pretty deep. But basically, the second death involves the lake of fire. And what that is like an eternal separation. And it is not something that conquerors need to fear because we're not going in there, so it has no power over us. So always remember Philippians 4:19 tells you, and my God shall supply all your needs according to his riches and glory in Christ Jesus. So that means whatever test or persecution that we may face, we can be confident that number one, God is aware about it, and number two, he's able to help. Right. So don't get too discouraged to the point where you're ready to throw in the towel. Because when you will come out on the other side victorious, no matter what is going on. And that's important for you to remember. All right. So that's it. Now this is your time to do the SOAP study method. So SOAP study method. So scriptures we read today in Revelation 2 verses 8 through 11, Romans 2:28 through 29, and Philippians 4:19. So go back through your scriptures, highlight them, read them again, and then your observation. What did you observe or learn today from what we read? Application. How can you apply what you learned to your life right now? And then prayer, pray to God using these scriptures or, whatever you felt led to share in your heart, and affirm them for yourself. Okay. So that is it. And I will see you in the next lesson. Bye-bye.